Okay, so I think it's time to start. Yes.
Yes, we will start now. Welcome, everybody, to our first webinar here from the EAP Chamber of Individual Members. I am Christina Winkler. I am chair of this chamber, and with my colleagues, we organized this first webinar for you. I just, to start with, I wanted to just to explain some minor things. So this webinar will be recorded, as it was mentioned in the invitation. Please, if you don't want to appear on this recording, just switch off your camera, and you can even take out your names if you wish. It will be recorded so that you can later see the recording, listen to it again. I think it will be valuable for everybody. There's also the IA companion that is activated to have transcription, which might be helpful. Our project is probably to write an article in our journal about this topic and about our meeting here, reflecting on this topic together of OCD, of Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder. And I also wanted to let you know again that there will be no certificate issued. It means a lot to me that you can notice this, because our officers in Vienna wouldn't be able to reply to your emails if you ask for it. So please just note that it's just for coming together, working together, having the pleasure to see you. That's a rare moment to have our members all together in this sort of meeting. So very welcome to you. I want to introduce Ewa Dobiała and Lynne Rigaud, who are talking tonight about OCD, Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder. Ewa Dobiała is a medical doctor. She's a psychiatrist and psychotherapist and supervisor from Poland. She is a specialist in psychiatry, child and adolescent psychotherapy, and community therapy. I won't develop much more her biography because it's quite long, and Lynne's also, because you will receive after this webinar, you will receive the slides of the two presentations. You will receive the references, scientific references, and you also will receive the biographies. So still, Lynne Rigaud, she lives in France, in south of France. She is a bilingual psychologist and psychotherapist, clinical supervisor, mediator, and trainer. And so she has mainly worked with addiction services, supporting individuals facing trauma, addiction, anxiety, depression, of course, OCD, relationship difficulties, and life transitions. So maybe we start right now. Ewa, please, I give you the hand.
Thank you. Thank you for this introduction. Dear colleagues, it's really a honor for me to be here in front of you and to open our series of webinars, trying to tell a few words. I will also try to open the presentation, and I hope everything will work properly. Christina, does it work? Yes, that's great.
Okay.
Okay. Dear colleagues, before we'll go to some kind of reflection from the position of psychotherapy, but also from the position in which we are very often as supervisors, I would like in the very beginning to share with you some clinical map, psychiatrical map, what we are thinking when we are in a field of obsessive and compulsive disorders. For sure, if we've got a little bit more time, and I would be able just to ask you what kind of first ideas you've got in your mind thinking about OCD. Most of you probably would think about some kind of obsessions, compulsions, or some kind of maintaining loop. Uh, all of these aspects we know really very well. And for most of us, it is also clear all kind of diagnostic aspects connecting with OCD. And of course, we know that our psychiatrical knowledge about OCD really has been changing for many decades. And this all what was written inside of ECD-10 at that moment in ECD-11, it's described in a little bit different way. Well, this all slides will be shared with you, so I will not talk with details, just to show you the most important aspects. Thinking about OCD via prism of ICD-11, we see some kind of changes inside of this way of thinking. We are thinking much more about obsessive-compulsive or related disorders. We are also thinking about some kind of mental compulsions, which in ICD-10 sometimes were not mentioned so strong. And thinking about OCD via prism of 11 version, we start to talk about some kind of insights, insight about some kind of reflection about OCD and all symptoms. And dear colleagues, it is really very important because from the position of a supervisor, very often when I talk with a therapist, with young therapists, I see that sometimes it is not so clear where there is a differences between OCD and another psychiatrical clinical pictures. And these differences are not important only from the scientific position, but they are very important for us as a psychotherapist to know where is the door which we need to open when we've got in front of ourselves person who comes to us with symptoms which are very close to OCD. So thinking about OCD, we always need to reflect and try to differentiate if it's OCD or maybe it is an ancastic personality, if it's OCD, or maybe it is closer to autistic spectrum, or maybe we've got somebody in front of ourselves who has experience with PTSD, and this all symptoms from this area. Working with kids and adolescents, very often I also discover and reflect the differences between OCD-related disorders and some psychosis spectrum, because sometimes with very low insight, it is not so obvious where there is the border and how to differentiate it immediately. Sometimes just time shows us, but not always in the moment when we see the person, the client, the patient, however we call the person who is in front of us in our praxis. And sometimes, of course, this kind of rumination and avoidance may also be similar to some of symptoms related to anxiety or depression. And of course, when we work really very in a very clinical way, or when we work in a team when we meet psychiatrists, psychotherapists, and other mental health professionals, we have much more time just to sit and just to try recognize in which position and in which clinical picture really this person is. And sometimes we've got some experience with it. We are able to recognize that if some symptoms are much more ego-dystonic, maybe it's closer to OCD. If the symptoms are much more ego-syntonic, maybe we could think about some kind of an ancastic personality. We could also recognize some kind of mechanisms which are connected with this all symptomatical pictures, if it's a rather this kind of loop, or maybe rather some kind of control or perfectionism, which is much more related with the personality structure. And of course, there are much more these clinical differences, thanks to which we are able to try to differentiate in which position we are. And at the same time, sometimes the life is not so easy, because sometimes we've got our client, our patient, in a low level of integration of the personality, and at the same time with OCD. At the same time, sometimes we've got our patient with autistic spectrum disorder, and with some kind of co-occurrence of OCD, because, well, life likes to create the story which are really very complex. So not only we need to make this kind of differentiation from the psychiatrical position, but we also need to remember that sometimes we've got a person in front of ourselves who is coming to us with an experience of trauma, with a level of development according to in a field of autistic spectrum, and at the same time with developed OCD, with developed obsessive and compulsive disorders. Of course, one of the most difficult pictures about which we also need to really remember, it is this all differentiation between OCD and psychotic and psychosis. It is not so rare, and sometimes really it is not so clear to be sure in which field we are. So if everything is not so clear, sometimes in front of us it's a question. So how we could find ourselves inside of it? What kind of map could be really useful for us psychotherapists in our mental health work? I am a positive psychotherapist. In my approach, very often we use one tool which we call balance model. It is really very easy model which shows the complexity of human being, of every individual, showing the areas of body, of relations, of achievement, and fantasy. And thinking about these four areas, we also could introduce inside of it some more contemporary knowledge, which could really very clearly shows the dynamic of levels of OCD. So, dear colleagues, because of the fact that I still have 10 minutes, and I know that, well, our time is really very valuable, I would like to show you just few insights how we could look at this OCD level by level, to remember that no matter from which position we look at our patient or client, from which approach, from which school of psychotherapy, we still look from this holistic understanding of every person. So every of us, no matter from which country we are, we've got this body area. And in this body area, we've got this somatic, neurobiological level, and we've got this sensorical level. And if we look from OCD, from these two levels, we could, of course, see a lot of very well described neurobiological factors of OCD. We've seen a lot of genetical aspects, a lot of issues connected with neurotransmitters, which give us psychiatrists a chance also to use some pharmacological treatment, which is really very important when we think about OCD. And of course, we see a lot of somatic consequences of this all somatic and neurological patterns which are connected with OCD. But of course, it is not only about neurotransmitters. It is not only about some kind of cortisols and dysregulation in this all areas of our brain, but it is also about some kind of sensorical aspects about which sometimes we forget. It is really very important when we have in front of us patients who have OCD and they are also neuroatypical, for example, from autistic spectrum. Because very often in this situation, this all OCD symptoms are not exactly organized around cognitive anxiety, but they could be organized around some kind of sensorical needs. That something is, for example, disgusting, that something has not this kind of texture, that something is overwhelming at the sensorical level. And it is also this area which we as a psychotherapist, we need to take under consideration when we really have in front of us a person with OCD. And dear friends, body is very important part of us, but it is of course not the only part. We've got also this area described by Nosrat Peseshkian in his balance model, this area of contact. And in this area of contact, we could talk about all affects and all relational aspects. And when we think about OCD, and when we look at OCD via prism of affect, we are not only talking about anxiety, because there are much more different emotions which we could meet with working with our patient with OCD. It is, of course, anxiety, but it is also disgust. Sometimes it's guilty feeling. Sometimes it's shame. Sometimes it is some kind of intolerance of uncertainty. Dear colleagues, we need to remember that this affective level of OCD is really very, very rich. And the same, really very rich, is all around this relational level. Because it is like it, that many of symptoms of OCD have some kind of relational manifestation, and they also could involve the family inside all kind of communication via this kind of rituals, and it also could be some kind of transfer of responsibility around it. And of course, we as a psychotherapist, sometimes we are in a position when it is not so easy to recognize the border between empathy and between reassurance, between co-regulation, and between participation in some kind of compulsions. So again, it is really very important to remember about this level before we will go to the next. I know I've got 5 minutes. Before we will go to the next level of narrative aspects of OCD. Because here, of course, we also have a lot of thoughts and a lot of ideas which are very often connected with some kind of obsession. And at the level of behavioral, we've got a lot of visible and invisible compulsion, which are very well described in this area of OCD. And dear colleagues, as you see, I'm making some kind of marathon. And at the same time, I do not want to forget about this all fantasy area, which is also involved in the field of OCD, because this all cultural and transgenerational level also could be the part of OCD, some kind of transgenerational scripts, some kind of colonizing of values, which very often working with patients, we also could really recognize. And sometimes we as a psychotherapist, we all know that it's not only finishing at this level, but also this existential level could be really very deeply involved in this field of OCD. So, dear colleagues, this this model between L1 to L8 give us a chance not to forget about any part, even if the patient who is in front of us really introduce very complex story by their not only behavior but also by their stories and by all the picture which she introduced to our praxis, to our cabinet. And we, as a psychotherapist, no matter from which approach we are, we really need to remember about few things, not to make cognitive reductionism, not become the external certainty system of the patient, but also not to misread high functioning of the patient, because very often some kind of symptoms could be really hidden. And it is really important for us to recognize the mechanisms, but also recognize the level of the stabilization and really to find the proper door which we could open working at the psychotherapeutic level, remembering that when we fulfill all regulation aspects, thinking also about all pharmacological part, we need to always come back to relationship, because it is the most important part, which could be the door to the cognitive, behavioral, cultural, transgenerational, and existential level. So it's our story, which we always go with our patient. It is some kind of journey from the moment how do we stop the compulsion to some kind of question, what need, what movement towards a life we could invite to really open the space for psychotherapy. And here I would like just to give the floor to Lynne, which will be, I hope, at that moment would like to share this idea from your perspective and from this a little bit more psychotherapeutical perspective about
Yes,
it.
thank you, dear Eva. Thank you very much for this perfect presentation. I wanted to mention that you wrote an article about these the L8 system, and you will also receive this article. It will be very soon published. And Lynne now can follow up. Lynne, if you are ready. And she also based her presentation on an article she published from the Gestalt therapeutic point of view.
So I'll just try and find the screen. Can you see that?
Not yet,
Not
but
yet.
yes, now we see. Yes.
Okay. So thank you, Eva, for your very detailed explanation of the OCD process. What I'm going to present now is the relational process that you mentioned just at the end. It is one door into OCD. What I would like to say is this is only one case study and doesn't represent all the ways in which we can work with OCD. It's more about meeting the client where they are. This particular approach may not be adapted for everybody, but this is a client that myself and my colleagues Margarita Spaniolo-Lob and Thomas Andrasik decided to write a case study about to demonstrate how the relational process can bring something positive to an OCD client. So therapeutic approaches up to now, OCD often has a biological component. It's, as Ewa mentioned, it's a treatment that uses combinations of medicine usually and psychotherapy. They both have common and specific effects on brain activity. Interestingly, in Europe and the USA, most of the guidelines recommend a cognitive and behavioral approach called exposure and response prevention. However, researchers and clinicians are beginning to focus on developmental, relational, and emotional factors now and are calling for therapies to bring them into account. So interestingly, Bruce Wampold, who is a very well-known international researcher in psychotherapy, he named it himself. He said about OCD, exposure and response prevention is pretty good with some provisos. We know how to reduce symptoms, but the people are not back to work. They don't have romantic or intimate relationships. And that, I think, is where the humanistic relational angle can bring its own contribution to treating OCD. So if you think about it, think about the case of a teenager who has obsessive thoughts about killing their parents and fears knives. This is actually quite a common theme for teenagers, killing their parents and fear of dying. So in an exposure response therapy, we might ask the person to gradually expose themselves to thinking about a knife, then going to the kitchen and looking at a knife, then going to the kitchen and open the drawer and touching the knife, then taking the knife, and you build up little by little a kind of exposure to the stimulus, if you like. Then perhaps they might cut vegetables next to a parent, and little by little they would learn to tolerate the anxiety without acting on the impulsion. So that in itself is an important therapeutic invention because it does have a reassuring effect. The person can realize that thoughts do not mean that they will act on them. However, it leaves something out. It doesn't help the patient understand their sense of self any better. They may be experiencing distressing emotions such as anger, shame, guilt, fear, as Ewa mentioned. For example, I must be a bad person. Am I basically a murderer? This is something that one of my clients said to me. I'm not like the others. It's impossible to love me. I ruin people's lives. Am I mad? These are the thoughts going through these people's heads, and it's a heavy burden. Their obsessive thoughts do not align with their sense of self and values, and it creates an internal dissonance between how they want to be and what these obsessive thoughts make them out to be. So the humanistic perspective asks an additional question. If symptoms are meaningful adaptations to life experiences, what are they adapting to? What problem is the person trying to solve? What need is being expressed indirectly? So this shifts our attention from the content of the obsession towards its function within the person's life. Now, our article with Margarita and Thomas was based on the developmental aspects of OCD, and we based it on the fact that much research today is pointing towards the fact that mental health and psychopathology can be traced to a person's history of interactions with other people. Now, OCD has an early onset. Most OCD has onset between 8 and 10 or 18 and 25, interestingly, those two age groups. So it does suggest that developmental processes will be relevant in how they develop. So research shows us that early relationships can be both assets and risks for development, as we all know. The capacity to regulate anxiety is not innate. It's something that we learn in our families, with our people around us. It develops through repeated experiences of support, co-regulation, and relationship. So early relationships can be a source of learning about safety or a source of learning insecurity. Research shows us that the anxious attachment is associated with psychological distress and is common in people with OCD. And it has also shown that it may contribute to OCD beliefs and symptoms as a way of managing insecurity, threat, and uncertainty. So there is something about this developmental environment, this developmental sense of who I am in this environment and how can I meet it, that is active in the development of OCD. Research, as Ewa said, suggests that emotions are very closely associated with OCD. So guilt is common, shame is associated with severity of symptom and help seeking. People may not seek help because they feel ashamed of what they seem to be. Anger is very common with OCD. Fear is one of the most pervasive emotions, and emotional regulation is very common. So this will contribute to distress and to maintaining the symptom. So researchers have pointed to a clinical approach that focuses on interpersonal relational patterns, because that's where we learn how to manage, for example, emotional regulation. Just very briefly, what they say is that the enhancement of attachment security can help with the psychopathology. Support for interpersonal approaches for OCD is important, and they also point to integrating cognitive and attachment-based therapeutic approaches to OCD. So I think it's interesting that research is really pointing us in this direction now, and that's how we looked at this therapeutic journey that I'm going to describe to you. So, although OCD can't be reduced to any one psychological process, there is one that stands out as quite common and very interesting to look at. It's called retroflexion, and it begins in the developmental years, and it is common in OCD sufferers, according to Unobol and Topologo, who did some research on that. So what is a retroflexion? Basically, retroflexion is that the child attempts to contact the other person, and doesn't feel understood or supported. The child learns that it's better not to express their needs or emotions because they won't be heard or they won't be accepted. So they turn their thoughts and their emotions back onto themselves rather than expressing them. And because this child doesn't know how to manage their anxiety, this is a young child, they haven't learned how to do this, they start experiencing unbearable tension levels. And one of the hypotheses is that obsessive thoughts and compulsions can emerge as a way of managing this internal tension. So in therapy, if we look at the retroflexion point, that's what we're going to be working with today. The idea is to help the person to bring back into relationship what was turned back onto the self through obsessive thoughts and compulsions. So let's meet my client. Let's map out a journey with Amer. So Amer is 19 and he lived with his parents and his two siblings. It was a loving family, and they'd moved from another country to another one 15 years ago. Now, as a child, Amer had a severe infection, and this is one of the biological contributions to OCD, is severe infection at a very early age. And his parents noticed some strange behavior afterwards, but they didn't really understand it, and it was not diagnosed. And it's interesting to know that OCD has an average of 17 years before being diagnosed. Parental anxiety was very present. They felt insecure financially, had difficulty finding work. They had difficulty with the language, which means that there's a sense of isolation in the country and a lack of safety. There was a lot of trauma in their lives and deaths, which they had experienced in their home, and separation. These were all major themes over 15 years. So already you can start getting a sense of the feeling of insecurity in the wider field, if you like, in the wider environment. In 2020, Amer got COVID, and he wasn't at home at the time, and he was absolutely terrified, had a really bad experience, and as well, he was listening to the stories of the pandemic deaths in the news, and this became an absolute terror for him. His anxiety levels became very, very severe, and he developed a moderate but disturbing case of OCD without compulsions. So during all this, the parents developed a really protective attitude to their children, and it is known that one of the contributions to OCD is overprotection. The main themes that Amer developed, the obsessions, was I'm going to die and I want to kill my parents. These thoughts were present every day and were very difficult to live with. So he had difficulties maintaining a normal life, felt depressed and hopeless, and he started modifying his behavior, was afraid to go downstairs to the kitchen because he was afraid he might kill his parents. So he started staying in his bedroom and not coming out. He was diagnosed with anxiety and OCD by his doctor and prescribed an SSRI, which is an antidepressant, which is the usual medicine. So what we can see is that Amer had a biological vulnerability to anxiety, probably. He had grown up in an environment where illness, uncertainty, loss, and worry were really present. So it's difficult to imagine how he could have, integrated a sense of appeasement in an environment where there's so much anxiety around. The family was loving and caring, but anxiety had been a constant experience for many years. So my formulation was that OCD had become one of the ways he attempted to create safety when neither he nor those around him felt particularly safe. What interested me clinically was not simply the presence of OCD symptoms, but the context in which they had emerged. And the question for me was not how do we get rid of these thoughts, but what's the function they're serving in this young man's attempt to feel safe? So, as I said in the article that I wrote with my colleagues, we used the dance steps of Margarita Spaniolo-Loeb's model of therapy. It's 8 steps that describe different moments and phases of the therapeutic journey. Today, it's going to be too short to do 8 steps, so I've kind of regrouped these steps into 5 broader phases. If you want to read the article, the reference is at the bottom there, and it will be sent out to you. So, as humanistic therapists, we don't go directly to behavioral change. Humanistic therapy uses a relational process that progressively builds a secure sense of self and relational competency. Change emerges from this process. So there's kind of 5, I would say, progressive phases. Safety supports awareness. Awareness supports meaning. Meaning supports new relational experiences and change. These new experiences gradually become new relational competencies, and a new secure sense of self can emerge. So let's start with safety supports awareness. Meeting Amer. So Amer, when I met him, he was sitting on the sofa with his legs tied in knots. I couldn't see him breathing. He had his head down and really made very little eye contact. And his voice was really small. And he didn't initiate contact at all. It was me that had to come towards him all the time. I suspected that he was hyper-aroused and out of his window of tolerance. So as a therapist, I know that a hyper-aroused patient's going to find it difficult to be open to relating to another person. It's difficult because the cortisol levels are too high and he was in survival mode. So I know that I have to self-regulate myself in order to help him regulate. Now, in terms of developmental issues from these first impressions, I deduced that Amer may not be familiar with mobilizing self-support. This might not be something that he knows how to do, that he's learned, and in particular, how to support his body when he's anxious. My relational impression was that Amer seems to be withdrawing from me. We're two people in this room and he's withdrawing, so I figure it must be from me. My question is, I wonder how that became his way of being in contact. Who am I for him? Why is he using that form of contact with me? It looks like a retroflected process. I became curious to know more. How does this patient's process tell a story of needs for safety and containment? What relational self-functions are there and which are underdeveloped or modified? So I self-regulated. I slowed my pace, I softened my voice, and I reduced my intensity of contact because as a therapist, I know my style can be slightly intense. So I decided to kind of really base my rhythm. And instead of contacting him directly with personal questions, I decided to take the heat off the contact and ask if he would like me to explain about OCD. That would give him a chance to kind of observe me as I was talking, to listen to my voice and to hear, whether my voice sounds like somebody that's safe or not. And so I regulated in that manner so that he could kind of get a sense of me as we're moving along. And I followed his rhythm rather than leading. As I was telling him about OCD, I watched him and he relaxed a little. I could see his body just ever so slightly letting go. The shoulder might go down a little bit. He started to breathe a little bit. Sometimes he leaned towards me, whereas before he was literally leaning back. And funnily enough, at the end, I made a very slight joke about something, and he even managed to kind of smile, and I could see a slight sense of humor emerging. I thought, okay, there's a support that I might be able to work with sometime. So the key idea in this phase is, before addressing the OCD symptoms of this person, the therapist and the client must discover how to be together. Now, once the Amer was a little bit more settled, I started working on awareness. I invited body awareness by asking what he noticed physically in him. And he identified tension in his stomach, and he linked it to feeling nervous about the session. I validated this because this is the most important thing to do for an OCD client, is to validate what they are feeling, because they often feel like they're crazy. So I validated. I said, well, it was understandable to feel nervous when meeting a therapist for the first time. Then I normalized it. I said through self-disclosure, sometimes I feel a bit nervous when I meet new people as well. This is giving Amer a sense of he's like everybody else. He's not odd. This is maybe a slightly corrective experience. Then I started to explore his experience. I asked him what it was like to know that I was nervous too. And he said to me, I feel better. It felt like it was normal and it was okay. So together we decided to accept the anxiety rather than trying to fight it and to put all that energy into it. Amer became even more regulated as he perceived his anxiety was both acceptable, understandable, and normal. So here we've already started with a correctional relational experience for the OCD client. He's noticing that I'm validating, normalizing, supporting him. And this is the beginning of the path towards a secure relationship. And very interesting to differentiate normal situational anxiety from the anxiety of OCD. So in the end of that session, he decided to come back. Over the next few sessions, it was apparent that it was really important to strengthen his sense of bodily safety, because he had thoughts about, I'm going to die every morning on waking up. So what I wanted to do was to get him to test direct experience of the environment. Could he feel the chair supporting it? Was it solid enough? I got him to test that chair. I got him to sit on it, to push the sides, to notice whether it was solid. This is to create a really clear physical indication that his body can validate this is true for him. Could he feel his feet on the floor? Were the walls solid? I got him to push the walls and say, are they solid? Are you really sure about this? Again, creating that sense of confirmed safety. Then another thing was there enough air to breathe in the room? I said, can you notice if there's enough air in the room? And he wondered about that. And I said, well, if you have a doubt, notice that you can open the window. And so there were options in creating more safety if necessary. Then we moved to his internal experience, because this is a guy who has had some really terrible experiences, bodily experiences of illness. So what I wanted to do was create a sense of my body can also be a safe place. So he tried to stop breathing, and actually what he noticed was that he couldn't. He at some point in time, his body decided to keep breathing. And we put meaning on this. We talked about his past experiences of illness and how traumatic they were. It was heartbreaking to hear him talk about how awful the COVID was for him, especially because everybody around him was talking about all the deaths that had happened. So he didn't understand his body, and there was a lot of a lack of support in the field. He noticed through the exercises that his body survived difficult circumstances before, and that it may be more competent than he thought. So these experiences provide a direct sensory contrast to OCD's catastrophic predictions. And over many sessions, this helped him to develop a more reliable sense of safety in himself and in the therapeutic relationship. Because as we were working on this, we became a team. And little by little, Amer developed a sense of me being a supportive person who validated and helped him to grow and to develop. So the next stage was awareness supports meaning, understanding the client's relating patterns and intentions. So the subject of Amer's intrusive thoughts, I want to kill my parents, came up. And as we thought about this, his body became really rigid and he didn't want to talk to me. He was looking down and hugging his chest. So here I identify an old relating pattern that the child's developed and that's become a fixed pattern, because he's hugging himself in front of me. So I asked him what he was doing with his arms to increase his awareness. And he said he was protecting himself. So I said, well, what are you protecting yourself from? And he discovered that he thought I would think he was crazy or bad, that I would judge him. So here we've identified his old pattern, his experiences of others judging and turning away from contact. So contact with important others did not support him from being able to turn towards them when in difficulty. Therefore, he turns his energy towards himself. So I asked him if he had experiences of being judged, and he said yes. Sometimes his parents told him to get over it, to stop being stupid, or to grow up when he looked for help. So he didn't really have anywhere to go with his anxiety. And they were kind of saying, you're not okay at this point. So here we identify the experiences of the past as the basis of the adjustment that's being expressed with me today. So here I validate and normalize his fear. I normalize by saying that I too wouldn't like to be judged. I can understand why he would protect himself. Having experienced some invalidation in the past, this is an offer of a new type of interpersonal interaction for him. The therapist is validating his experience and normalizing it by acknowledging that they don't like feeling judged either. So again, I'm linking Amer back into the world with everybody else. Reality test. This is where we test the actual situation. I ask him if he would like to know what I think about his thoughts. This is inviting the client to take a step into the reality of the here and now in this relationship, and he will discover if his hypotheses were right or not. You need to pay attention to this, because he has to have enough self-support and feel sufficiently supported to be able to do this, as it's quite confrontational. So when I asked him if he would like to know what I thought about his thoughts, he looked uncomfortable, but then he self-supported, breathed, sat in his chair, and he said yes. So I said, well, I don't get a sense of you as mad at all. I think your thoughts hold a lot of useful information to work with, and I'm interested to know more. I'm curious about how those thoughts can help us to understand things better. I guess I think of your intrusive thoughts as pointers to solutions for you. At this point, he looked so relieved and his body posture changed. So here again, we have a new relational experience of support for him. This is safe support. The other can be seen as a secure base, and from here we can explore his process further. Based on this increasing security, we can explore a part of him that is being expressed through the intrusive thought. Find the real need behind the behavior. So in OCD, working on the meaning of the symbolic thoughts and behavior is essential. It holds the key to understanding the nature of the repressed need or expressed through retroflexion. So Amer's thought was, I want to kill my parents. And he was afraid of knives. So I decided to use a Gestalt technique of working with dissociated parts of self to better understand them. And I asked Amer if he could just try on being the knife, becoming the knife, and seeing what that knife was trying to achieve for him. What was it trying to do? What was its purpose in his life? This is exploring the intentionality of his thought, of his behavior. And he realized, as we thought about it, that the knife was a way of cutting away his parents' constant worrying and anxiety that was stifling him. If you remember, they're anxious, these parents, the environment's complicated, and they're very overprotective. They were constantly saying, oh, you shouldn't do that. Oh, don't do that. Oh, no, that you won't be safe there. So he's stifled by this. And this knife was trying to cut that away. What this did for him in terms of meaning and his emotions was quite interesting, because he realized he didn't want to kill his parents at all. He realized how he had retroflected his need to say, stop, I want to be reassured, because he didn't have the resources, the relational capacity to solve his parents' anxiety. Over several sessions, he was also able to explore and resolve some of his shame and guilt, as he realized that he was not really motivated to kill his parents, and that he wasn't mad or bad, because those feelings of guilt and of shame and of being isolated or being mad and not like the others are incredibly isolating and very, very painful. So as he realized that this I want to kill my parents was just a symbol of his real need, this heaviness of shame and guilt began to make more sense. So then we moved on into the next phase. Meaning supports new relational experiences. And in this phase, the therapist works through the relational situation, but they don't just stop at validation and recognition. Now they invite the patient to perceive the here and now and to adjust in consequence to update old patterns. So in one session, Amer, we needed to find a date for the next session, and Amer insisted on finding a date that suited me. And he kept brushing aside my question, and what works for you? Well, I thought about this. I perceived what he was doing. There's something in this relational contact that affected me. So I figured he had an old fixed adjustment of looking after other people while ignoring his own needs. I decided to raise awareness. I notice you seem to want to look after my needs here. And he said, yeah. And actually, it's not written here. And I said, well, thank you. But is something that is looking after others something that you know about? And I now described how often he perceived anxiety and worry in his family and had become accustomed to looking after his siblings and even his parents, because he spoke the language in the country far better than the others, particularly his parents. And so he'd become the main man, and he was the one that had to look after administration and all sorts of different things, even going to the doctor. So it was heavy responsibility on him. So we discovered the intentionality of this adjustment of him looking after me and how it had developed from past experience. So now I'm going a step further. I'm going to take a reality check. I asked him to notice whether there was something about me that made him feel that I needed looking after. And he thought about that. And he said, no. And he smiled. From there, we readjust. This is the experiment. I invited him to try something new that would be more adapted to the situation here in present. How about you experiment with you letting me support you and see what that's like? And Amel noticed that he felt more relaxed and less under pressure. It felt good to not be responsible for somebody else's needs. So we've gone one step further here. We've checked reality, we've readjusted, and we've integrated into the present rather than being on the reactions from the past. As these new experiences gradually become relational competencies, we can start making bold steps together, as Margarita describes in her model. In this phase, the therapist works through the previous steps and this time supports the client to experiment different ways of being, to take a risk, to change their way of relating in the wider field. That means outside of therapy as well. This is the role of the carer as a support for developing relational competency in the wider world. So Amel noticed that his OCD had become particularly intense that week. And as we explored what was happening in his life, he realized he was anxious about returning home. His family were worried that he might catch a cold and ruin an upcoming holiday. So together we identified two themes. Amel had accepted responsibility for managing other people's anxiety, and he was being asked to control something that was ultimately outside of his control. We started to experiment using role play, and Amel practiced responding differently to these demands because up to then, he found it very difficult to talk to his parents and very difficult to tell them what he needed or to put limits and boundaries to relational things. So here we practiced doing that. And he experimented with expressing his own position while I provided feedback about how I experienced him. It was quite fun. We also explored what happened when he lowered his eyes, because I noticed that he lowered his eyes as I was being perhaps an angry parent. And we opened that up and explored what was going on for him. And actually, it was difficult for him to hold his presence when he thought somebody might look at him with anger. So we experimented with staying in contact with that look. The outcome was in the following session. Amel told me that he'd spoken to his family, told them that he couldn't control when he caught a virus, that they might be disappointed, but they would manage together. And funnily enough, his family understood and there was no anger.
Lynne, you have 5 more minutes.
Okay. So the progress that's been made is that over time, Amel noticed that his OCD was often present when he was worried about something in his present day situation. He was beginning to understand that he needed to interpret his intense thoughts as a warning sign, that he had a need or an emotion that needed to be acknowledged in the here and now. Over time, as he gained confidence in his ability to identify a need and to be able to attend to it, his OCD symptoms diminished in intensity. Sometimes they could be triggered by situations, but he became more able to support his body, making the links to the meaning of the thought and to reach out to others for support. It must be said that OCD is not necessarily something that one can cure completely. Very often we can diminish symptoms, have a much better kind of way of managing it, create a much better relational environment, but there may still be some OCD symptoms that remain for life. Okay, so a more secure sense of self emerges. Having fun. This is an interesting phase. In this phase, the therapist works through the previous steps and this time supports the client in developing their sense of fun and exploration. It's a time of letting go of anxiety. This is the role of the carer as a support for developed feelings that things will be okay. I can manage. So what we noticed was that Amel developed more flexibility and self-support over time, and his humour became more present. There was less holding back, and he was increasingly able to take a lighter perspective on different situations. So in previous times, when therapy began, school and teachers really provoked his anxiety, and his OCD was very intense the evenings before. In this session, some months later, we're talking about 8 or 9 months later, he described a teacher who'd become irritated with the class and reacted dramatically. Now, normally that would have terrified him. In this story, he rolled his eyes and joked about it as he was telling me, and we laughed together. And it was really interesting because I decided to create some awareness around that. And what we did was we explored what was happening between us then, at that moment. And I told him that I experienced him as lighter, as more alive, as more inviting. And he was surprised and pleased by this feedback. It was a feedback to him about, in the here and now, how relationally he could also affect how I was perceiving him. It felt very different from the anxious, withdrawn way he usually expected others to experience him. So this behavior, the whole point of therapy is obviously that, it's not just in therapy that it happens, but outside. And what was really interesting is that we reflected about his teachers and that he couldn't really change them, but he might be able to relate to them differently and perhaps slightly more lightly. And this led to an experiment where he asked a teacher for help when he didn't understand something. And to his surprise, the teacher responded positively. So Amel discovered that if he expressed his needs directly, other people could often meet them. So this is, I've done this case study. It's very rushed here. Obviously, there is an ending phase. And in this ending phase, most therapists know how to do an ending phase, but the dyad notices what they've achieved through their meeting. What meaning does it have for them both? What are they taking away from this meeting? Now the client's invited to integrate the relationship and to hold it as a piece of their life journey. We're parting and the relationship is integrated as a form of reference for the future in other relationships. It's a more secure attachment. I won't go with that example because we're probably too late. But here, what did Amir achieve then? So he understood that his OCD symptoms were meaningful responses to anxiety rather than signs that he was mad, bad, or dangerous. He recognized how shame, guilt, and fear contributed to the intensity of his OCD, and he recognized what the meaning was behind those emotions. He became more aware of the needs and emotions hidden behind his intrusive thoughts. He learned to express his needs directly rather than managing distress through withdrawal, self-protection, and retroflexion. He developed a greater sense of security in himself, in his body, and in relationships with others. He became less preoccupied with controlling anxiety, uncertainty, and controlling others. OCD became less frequent, less intense, and most importantly, more manageable. He developed a more integrated sense of self and a more hopeful relationship with the future. I can manage uncertainty and it'll be all right.
What do you
there
think?
You go.
Is it
so
time
we can probably stop there.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Lynne also, as you understood, wrote an article on that, and you will also receive it. And we now want to invite you to have a common reflection on this topic. So we thought about creating breakout rooms where you can meet about 10 people together, and you can discuss a bit about this topic. I will give you a question Lynne and Ewa reflected on, and so that you have just a line where your thoughts can go. And then after the breakout rooms, which will be quite short, like 10 minutes, you can ask questions. The best is to write it in the chat, and we will select some questions to develop a bit more, okay? So the suggestion is to think of a client with OCD or obsessive-compulsive symptoms. What was the symptom trying to regulate, to protect, to avoid, or to communicate? And what did you feel pulled to do as a therapist? For example, did you feel pulled to reassure? Or did you feel pressure or control or wanted to fix something? Did you notice shame, guilt, fear, or a feeling of responsibility? What differential diagnosis would you keep in mind? So, Wojciech, please let us go into breakout rooms. Wojciech is our host. He's doing all the technical stuff. Thank you very much. See you in 10 minutes.
Wojtek, please check if there are people in all rooms, because I'm not sure who is just observing us, and sprawdź, czy
Yeah. After when everybody will join, I will check.
Thank you.
If they are able to talk or they are alone. So
Yes.
right now in each room is everywhere is 3 people or more. The less is 3 people, so they could discuss. There are bigger rooms and there are smaller rooms. Right now.
Okay, so at least 3 it's enough.
No, 3, 4, yes, 4. 4 is the least number right now.
Perfect.
How much
Should
time?
Should we pause the recording?
Yes, maybe yes. That's a good idea. Yeah. Last few seconds and we'll be again together.
Yes, so let's wait for everybody to be back here. Well, so maybe some people left in the meantime. So welcome back, and I hope you had a nice time sharing in between you. So probably you didn't know each other, so that's a good time also to meet with new people from EAP. And so, well, the room is open for questions and for a discussion. So maybe some of you could write something in the chat, or, well, even ask to talk. It's also okay. We have almost 15 minutes.
Yeah, it'd be good to hear some experiences, what they noticed in their own experiences.
I put my hand up. Can I speak?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sure.
Lynne, well done. I didn't hear the first part because I declined, but Lynne, I was in time for yours. And what struck me was your bravery, and your sustaining the sensitivity of the delicacy of the relationship because of the pressures and the judgments on Amir from other people, that not only, that what I kind of took from it was that when he came to you, there'd been a lot of attempts probably, and that I thank you so much for sharing it with us. I was just blown away, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. It's really sweet. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I think the word bravery is very interesting that you've brought that in, because I think OCD can fetch the therapist in that area of courage and bravery. It's, can I manage this process? It's not easy to know what interventions to use at the right time because it's so delicate. Yeah. I did, for example, with the symbolic work around the knife, I really had to make sure that he was sufficiently supported already, that he could support his body, that he felt supported by me. I wouldn't have gone to that type of work early on in the work. You have to make sure that the support is there.
Yeah, you did.
We have a question in the chat from Angela Abella. She says, I see a lot of couples and sometimes one is OCD. How do you focus on the relationship as the client in this case?
Ewa, I have not worked with a couple in those circumstances, so that's a newbie for me.
Well, from my perspective, when I work with couples, it is always a question, who is a client? Because working in the individual psychotherapy, it's clear the client is this person. But working with the couples, the client is a relationship. So the perspective is a little bit different. And sometimes if I work with the couples, when one of the person from the couple has some kind of emotional challenges, it is really very important also everything about this awareness, because sometimes it's just important that one of this person from this couple is in his or her individual psychotherapy. Because, well, this couple therapy, it is not a place for individual psychotherapy of this person. Of course, this all dynamics, it is really very important to be introduced also in this couple therapy process. But from this position, when one of this person who is really with this all challenges is really aware of it, because if not, then it's a question if it's really couple therapy or rather psychoeducation or some kind of support for this person. So again, we really need to remember who is a client in the couple in the therapy of the couple, and then having this order, it started to be a little bit more simple. Not very simple, because as Lynne introduced, and also I wanted to share it, sometimes the system is involved into this process of stabilization. So it is not so easy, because then the system is much bigger just to be aware of this all what's going on, but it's still possible.
There's another question in the chat. Or Angela, I see your hand rising. Do you want to add something because it was your question? Yeah, go.
Because I sort of was I found your presentation very interesting, and I was wondering, sort of, if you see, as you say, Eva, like the relationship is your client, this issue of retroflexion, like I'm a family therapist, so we say we hypothesize. It's like the formulation, no? The formulation is more about connection and their ability to connect, you know? And I wondered whether to explore the connection between them and how that connection is facilitated or blocked, sort of helps. Of course, yes, he also has individual therapy, and I do talk with his individual therapist, but in the context of the couple therapy, I sort of hypothesize this retroflexion, which could be coming from, from his generation when he was young, is about connection. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Keith reported from their group, we touched on the incompatibility of AI therapy with the sensitivity of approach I consider you proved necessary. So this was a remark, I think, very interesting. And we have another question. How to work with a client that has only one symptom, counting everything? No anxiety around anything, just being annoyed and frustrated if they cannot count. This question is from Sanya Stefanovic.
Okay, so maybe I will try to answer for one part of this question, and then maybe Lynne, you also would like to share. When I've heard this question, first of all, I had a question inside of myself, what kind of diagnose this person really have? Because sometimes it is not so clear. As I've told in this very beginning of our webinar, some single symptom could be connected with really very difficult aspects. I could imagine that this person has no OCD, only he's autistic, for example. So for me, it is not clear about whom it is really, well, the story. But if I would make some hypothesis that it is really about the person with OCD, sometimes it's like it that OCD goes together with some kind of personality issues, and sometimes also with some aspects connecting with bonding and the level of contact with emotions. So this all what we see in the really very beginning, it really does not mean that it's the whole picture. Sometimes symptoms are much more hidden. And sometimes after the process of stabilization, we are able to see the picture, which is not so visible in the very beginning. Well, I would be really very curious how this kind of person could start to introduce himself also at the emotional level when he will be stable in the contact with psychotherapy. No, psychotherapist, what kind of emotions he would be able to explore inside of himself, how at the sensorical level he would be able to feel himself, and then we could really see much more rich pictures of symptoms and started to really understand this person deeper. I don't know, Lynne, if you would like to add something from your perspective.
I was curious that there was no anxiety with the counting. So I think I'd be inclined to notice how this person comes into contact with me and kind of follow a phenomenological inquiry as to what this counting is actually achieving for that person, because you know, I like you said, I'm interested in the emotional layers behind. Is it true that there's no anxiety, or is it kind of behind the scenes somewhere? In any case, what's the function of that counting, and where does he do it, and when does he do it? What's the context that within which that happens?
Mm-hmm. Ina from Netherlands, she also said that she likes the Eva's model that is connected to her work with psychodrama. First, regulate the body, etc. And we work with future projection, which is connected to fantasy. Yeah, great. Yeah, and there are a lot of thanks to you, Ewa and Lynne. A lot of thanks for your presentations, for the value of your work, what you are sharing here with us. Thanks for organizing this webinar. So yes, we were really very happy to be able to do that, to welcome you, and that you were present, because otherwise nothing happens. So we hope that we can do this again. We haven't fixed the date yet, but for sure we will. And really, thank you very much, Ewa and Lynne, for starting to present something. Help EAP to become more live, to have members here in a room together, and really work also together, because of course your comments, your questions, it's a sharing between colleagues, intercultural, intermodal sharing of our professional competencies. So it's really great. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So bye-bye. And we, of course, you will be informed when we have our next, when we do our next step.
Excellent. Thank you.
Enjoy
Thank
your
you.
evening.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.